3 verses to the children, 1 verse to the parents. In 40 years of church you have almost certainly never heard that 4th verse read on its own. Not at a wedding. Not on Father's Day. It was never meant to be read on its own. Paul wrote it into a letter that was going to be read out loud. Not studied. Not printed. Read aloud. In one room. To everybody standing in it. We know that is how these letters traveled, because he says so in another one. To the Colossians he writes, "When this letter is read among you, have it read in the church at Laodicea too." Read. Aloud. To a room. Picture that room. Somebody's house, because there were no church buildings yet. Oil lamps. People standing along the walls because there are not enough places to sit. A man near the front holds a letter from a prisoner in Rome, and he reads it out. He reaches the 6th chapter and he says, "Children, obey your parents." And every adult in that room turns and looks at the children. Then he keeps reading. 4 lines later he says something to the adults, and nobody is looking at the children anymore. That 4th line is what this episode is about. 3 things sit buried in those 4 lines, and they almost never get read aloud with them. I will put all 3 on the table now, so you can watch me open them. First, the passage changes its verb halfway through. It hands the children 2 different commands in the space of one breath. Almost every sermon I have sat through treats them as a single command. They are not, and the difference decides who this passage still binds. Second, Paul attaches a promise, and the way he describes that promise has a real problem in it. I will show you the problem. I will not pretend I can solve it, because I cannot, and neither can anybody else. And third, the one that took longest to check, and the reason this episode exists. The single verse addressed to the parents contains a verb that appears exactly twice in the whole New Testament. The other time it appears, the one doing it is God. Hold those 3. We will open them in that order. Start with where the letter lands. Ephesus was one of the great cities of Roman Asia. Anybody educated there would have recognized the shape of what Paul is doing here on site. Greek and Roman writers had a standard form for how to write about running a household, and Aristotle lays that form out in the first book of his Politics. He says, "The smallest parts of a household are 3 pairs, master and slave, husband and wife, father and children. 3 pairs. Paul uses the same 3 pairs, in the same order, in this same stretch of Ephesians. But watch what he does to the form. Aristotle writes to the one in charge. The entire discussion is about how the master should rule, how the husband should rule, how the father should rule. The slave, the wife, and the child are the subject matter. They are not the audience. Nobody is talking to them. People are talking about them, in the room, while they stand there. Paul turns and speaks to both sides. Wives, and then husbands. Servants, and then masters. Children, and then fathers. Nobody in that room is only a topic. Everybody in the room gets addressed out loud. Let me be careful here, because this is easy to oversell, and I do not want to sell you anything. Paul did not invent an equality the ancient world had never imagined, and this passage has been argued over for centuries by people who read it more carefully than I do. What I am pointing at is narrower than that, and you can check it yourself. In the standard Greek form, the person underneath is discussed. In Paul's version, the person underneath is spoken to, and so is the person on top, which means verse 4 was written to be heard by the children. That is not a devotional flourish. It is just what happens when a letter is read out loud in a house. The kids were there. The letter says fathers, and the children heard it. Hold that image. It comes back at the end. Start with the verb change. Verse 1, Children, obey your parents in the Lord, for this is right. Verse 2, Honor thy father and mother. 2 sentences, 2 commands. In the Greek, they are not the same word, and they are not the same kind of instruction. The word in verse 1 is hypakouo. It is built out of two pieces, akouo, to hear, and hypo, under, to hear from underneath. It is the word for listening from a lower position, not listening as an equal across a table, listening the way somebody listens when they are not the one in charge, a servant, a crew, a child at an adult's knee. The whole word has a posture inside it, and the posture requires somebody standing above you. Then verse 2 changes the word. Honor, Timao. It is built on a noun, timai, and timai is a commercial word long before it is ever a warm one. It means what a thing is worth. It is the word for the money that actually changes hands. Matthew's Gospel uses it of 30 pieces of silver, the price of him that was valued. So timao, underneath, is not an emotion at all. It is an act of pricing. To honor somebody is to set a value on them, and then behave like that is what they are worth. That is not a technicality. Watch what it does to the two commands. Obedience is a posture, and a posture needs two bodies arranged in a fixed way, one underneath and one above. It only works while one of them is small. Pricing does not need any of that. A price can be set from any distance at all. It can be set on somebody who lives 4 states away, or on somebody who is not currently speaking to anyone in the family, or on somebody who has been dead for 11 years. And here is the part that quietly rearranges the whole passage. Paul quotes the 5th commandment. He quotes it for the honor word. He does not quote it for the obey word. Go back to Exodus, chapter 20, verse 12. Honor thy father and thy mother. That is the commandment. That is the whole verb. The commandment given at that mountain does not say obey. It never says obey. It says put a weight on them, set a price on them, treat them as worth something. Obey is what Paul adds, in a letter, in a sentence aimed at children in a household, sitting inside a paragraph about how to bring somebody up. I want to be honest about how far that goes. The Greek word Paul uses for children, tekna, does not have an age stamped on it, and people disagree about how far up the passage reaches. I am not going to hand you a rule for your own family. What I will say is what the text does, and what it does is this. The commandment your parent quoted at you says honor. The word obey is in a different sentence, in a different testament, addressed to a household with small children in it. If you are 58 and you cannot obey your mother, you have not broken the 5th commandment. The 5th commandment never asked you to. That is one loop closed. 2 to go. Verse 2 keeps going, and Paul puts a note in brackets, which is the 1st commandment with promise. That is a genuinely strange sentence, and once you see why, you cannot unsee it. Go back to Exodus 20 and read forward from the beginning. The 2nd commandment, the one about carved images, already has a promise attached. Verse 6, showing mercy unto thousands of them that love me, and keep my commandments. That is a promise, and it comes first. So what does Paul mean by first? 4 answers get offered, and all 4 are serious. Some read first as first in rank, not first in order. The most important of the commandments that carry a promise. Some read it as first in the 2nd half of the list, the half about how you treat people, rather than how you treat God. Some argue that the mercy in verse 6 hangs on the whole law, not on that one commandment, so it never counted as a commandment's own promise in the first place. And some read it as the 1st commandment, whose promise is made to the person who keeps it. I have read all 4. I do not know which is right, and I would rather hand you the gap than a tidy answer I invented, because the gap is the true thing. People have argued about that bracket for a very long time, and they are still arguing. If somebody tells you it is settled, they skipped a step. There is a second thing about the promise, though, and this one nobody disputes. It is simply sitting there in the two texts, and you can lay them side by side. Exodus says, "That thy days may be long upon the land which the Lord thy God giveth thee." Ephesians says, "That it may be well with thee, and thou mayest live long on the earth." Paul drops the last clause, "The land which the Lord thy God giveth thee." It is gone. Land and earth are the same word in Greek, so that is not the change. The change is the ending. In Exodus, the promise is nailed to a specific piece of ground, handed to a specific people, by name. It is a promise about a nation staying on its soil across generations. It was never a warranty on how long you personally get to live. Whether Paul shortened it on purpose is debated, and I will not stack anything heavy on top of a scholarly argument. Hold that loosely. But you do not have to settle it to see what the shortened version gets used for. Because here is what people build on top of it. Honor your parents and you will live long. So a long life means you did it right. So a hard life means you did it wrong. And then a year arrives when the marriage ends, and the scan finds something, and the account runs short again before the 11th of the month, and underneath all of it, quiet and steady, one sentence keeps running. Maybe this is about how I was with my mother. That reading needs the shortened version. It does not survive the full one. In Exodus, this is not a lever anybody can slide under your life. It is a nation being told that how it treats its old people is tied to whether it gets to stay where it is. Second loop closed. And now the third thing. Verse 4. "And, ye fathers, provoke not your children to wrath." The verb is parorgizo. Two pieces again. Orgizo, to make angry. And beside, alongside, close by. So this is not anger produced from a distance. It is anger produced from beside. The word has closeness built into it. This is the anger that only somebody standing right next to you, for years, is near enough to make. And that is the kind nobody can point to afterwards. There is no incident. It is the joke about your weight that got told at every family gathering for 11 years. Because it always landed. It is your brother's name arriving in the sentence directly after yours. Every single time. It is the thing that was going to happen on Saturday. And then the next Saturday. Write any one of them down on a page and it looks like nothing at all. That is the point. It was never designed to be one thing. Hold on to that. The real weight of the word is in where else it lives. In the whole New Testament, Parorgizo appears twice. Once here, and once in Romans chapter 10, where Paul is quoting Moses. And in that one, the person doing the provoking is God. That is the entire New Testament. Two occurrences, a Father and God. Go to the Greek Old Testament, the version Paul quotes from, and the picture sharpens considerably. There, this is a covenant word, and what it describes is what Israel does to the Lord. Deuteronomy 4. Deuteronomy 32, twice in the same song. Psalm 78. It is the word for idols and for broken promises, for the long, slow accumulating anger between a people and the God who brought them out of Egypt. That is the verb's home address. It lives inside the relationship between God and his people, and it names what happens when one side wounds the other, not once, but across generations. And Paul lifts it out of there and sets it down in a kitchen. He hands a father the verb for what a nation does to God, and tells him not to do it to a 7-year-old. That is the size of it. Not do not be strict, not do not shout. The word he reached for is the one his Bible keeps for the thing that fractures a covenant. And here I owe you a limit. I cannot prove Paul chose that verb for its history. He may simply have picked up a normal Greek word that was lying around. Hold it loosely. What I can show you is that the word carries that history, that it occurs twice in the New Testament, and that you can check both of those in an afternoon. Third loop closed. But the passage is not finished, because Paul wrote this instruction twice. Colossians, chapter 3, verse 21. Fathers, provoke not your children to anger, lest they be discouraged. Same instruction. Same position. Right after the line telling children to obey. But two things are different, and both of them matter. The first is that the command verb is not the same word. Ephesians uses parorgizo. Colossians uses erethizete, from a different verb entirely. 2 letters, 2 words, 1 instruction. That is worth knowing on its own, and it is where most people stop. The second difference is the one nobody stops for. Colossians adds a clause that Ephesians does not have at all, a consequence, lest they be discouraged. That word is athumosin, athumeo. And athumeo appears in the entire New Testament exactly once. This verse. Nowhere else. Not in a gospel, not in Acts, not in a single other letter. 27 books, 1 occurrence. And Paul spends it on a child. Break the word open. Thumos, spirit, heat, the fire in the chest. And in front of it, alpha, the little negative prefix, the one that turns theos into atheos, athumos, without fire. Put the 2 letters side by side, because this is the thing I actually wanted to show you. Ephesians warns a father that he can fill a child with orge, wrath. Colossians warns him that he can empty a child of thumos, spirit. And those 2 words, orge and thumos, are not strangers to each other. Paul lists them together in both of these same letters. In Ephesians 4, where he tells the church to put away bitterness and wrath and anger. And again in Colossians 3, a few lines above the verse we are looking at. So he knew both words well, and he built the warning out of both ends of them. One child gets filled up, one child gets emptied out. The Bible warns a parent about both. So what does it actually look like to be without thumos? You do not have to guess at that, because the Greek Old Testament spends this exact word on a named woman, and it gives you the whole scene around her. 1 Samuel, chapter 1. A woman named Hannah. Every year the family goes up to the feast together, and every year the same thing happens to her. The other wife needles her about having no children. And when you read that passage in Greek, our word is sitting right there, twice in 2 verses. She lost heart, she wept, and she did not eat. That is the picture you are being handed. Not a scream, and not a door slamming. A plate at a family table with nothing taken off it. One limit on that, before it does more work than it should. The Hebrew of that verse and the Greek of it do not line up neatly. The Greek translator handled it quite differently, and I would rather tell you so than smooth it over. Paul does not quote Hannah in Colossians either, and there is no reason to think she was in his mind. All I have done is ask the Greek Bible what this rare word looks like when it lands on an actual person. The answer it gives back is somebody at a family meal who cannot eat. There is a house in the Old Testament where you can watch both halves land, on 2 different people, under one roof. One father, 2 children, 2 different outcomes. Take the son first. 1 Samuel chapter 20. There is a feast, and Saul asks where David is, and Jonathan covers for him. And then his father turns on him at the table, in front of everybody sitting there, and he opens by insulting the boy's mother. Thou son of the perverse rebellious woman. Then verse 33. Saul cast a javelin at him. And then verse 34, which I want you to hear slowly, because the wording is doing all of the work here. So Jonathan arose from the table in fierce anger, and did eat no meat the 2nd day of the month, for he was grieved for David, because his father had done him shame. Fierce anger. Did not eat. And notice that the narrator does not leave the cause floating there for you to work out on your own. He names it, plainly, without protecting the father, because his father had done him shame. That is Ephesians 6:4, written down as a scene, roughly 1,000 years before Paul ever reached for the word. And in the same house there was a daughter. Her name was Michal, and about her the Bible tells you something it almost never tells you about anybody. 1 Samuel 18. Michal, Saul's daughter, loved David. Watch what her father does with that piece of information. Verse 21. Saul hears that she loves him, and he decides to give her to David. And the text puts his reason in his own mouth, out loud, that she may be a snare to him. The Hebrew word is mokesh, a trap, the stick that holds the bait. So the verse does not leave you guessing at his motive, and it does not make you infer it from his behavior. It states it. He looks at his daughter's love, and what he sees is equipment. Chapter 19. Saul sends men to kill David in his bed. Michal lets her husband down through a window, then lays a household idol in the empty bed and bunches goat's hair at the head of it, so that from the doorway, in bad light, it reads as a sleeping man. When her father's men arrive, she stalls them at that doorway. Then she lies to her father's face about all of it. She chose, openly, at real risk, against the one man in the country who could have had her killed for it. Whatever you have heard about Michal, and most people have only ever heard the ending, that happened first. And here I want you to notice what the narrator calls her, because he switches. Not Saul's daughter, Michal, David's wife. It is the one moment in her whole story where she gets to belong to the life she picked for herself. It does not hold. Chapter 25. One verse, almost thrown away in passing. But Saul had given Michal his daughter, David's wife, to Phalti the son of Laish. Read that one again slowly, because both names are sitting in it. His daughter, David's wife. The narrator puts both tags on her in the same breath, in the exact sentence where her father hands her over to another man. Nobody asks her anything. She does not get a line. Years later, David wants her back, and the reason is political. She is the old king's daughter, and having her makes his claim to the throne look stronger. 2 Samuel 3. She is fetched like property. And there is one line in that chapter about the man she had been living with all those years. Her husband went with her along weeping behind her to Bahurim. He weeps. Nobody writes down whether she did. And then the last scene of her life, in 2 Samuel 6. The ark is coming into the city. David is dancing in the street, and she is standing at a window again. That is the second window of her story, and I want you to hold the two of them side by side. The first time, she used a window to save his life. This time, she only watches through one. Michal, Saul's daughter, looked through a window and saw King David leaping and dancing before the Lord, and she despised him in her heart. Saul's daughter. Her father has been dead for years, and the narrator still files her under his name. She comes out and says the most cutting thing she can find, about him uncovering himself in front of the servant girls. And David answers her by naming her father. The Lord, he says, which chose me before thy father. Two men, still reaching straight past her to hit each other. And then the last sentence anybody ever writes about her, and I want you to hear which name comes first in it. Therefore Michal, the daughter of Saul, had no child unto the day of her death. Daughter of Saul, to the last word of her life. And here I have to stop and be honest with you, because this is exactly the place where a video like this one would cheat. The verse does not tell us why she had no child. It does not say she was punished, and it does not say God closed her womb. Preachers have been filling that silence in for centuries, usually by turning it into a penalty for what she said at the window. And the text simply does not say that. It says she had no child, and it says whose daughter she was. And then it stops. I am not going to tell you what the Bible itself declined to tell us. But look at what that one house produced. One son who left the table in fierce anger and could not eat. One daughter who arrived at the end of her life, still filed under the name of the man who had used her. Wrath and lost heart. Ephesians and Colossians. Paul was not writing about Saul. I have no evidence that house was anywhere in his mind, and I am not going to claim it was. What I am saying is narrower than that. The two things he warns a parent about are not abstractions somebody invented for a parenting seminar. Your own Bible had already shown you both of them, in detail, with names attached, long before Paul ever reached for the words. There is one more half to verse 4, and even the people who read verse 4 tend to skip it. Because the verse does not stop at do not. It has a second half, and the second half is the actual instruction. But bring them up in the nurture and admonition of the Lord. Bring them up. Ektrefete. That verb occurs twice in the whole New Testament, and both occurrences sit in this same letter, one chapter apart. The other one is chapter 5, verse 29, where Paul writes that no man ever hated his own flesh, but nourishes and cherishes it. Same word. The verb Paul reaches for to describe what a father owes a child is the one he had used a few paragraphs earlier for what a man does to his own body. And what a man does to his own body is feed it. Not once, memorably, in a way worth mentioning afterwards. 3 times a day for 50 years, without being thanked for any of them, and without once calling it an achievement. That is the instruction sitting in the second half of the verse. Not a project and not a campaign. Maintenance nobody argues with. So verse 4 is not a verdict at all. It is a diet. And there is one more word sitting in that second half, and it turns out to be the exact opposite of the one he forbade. Bring them up in the nurture and admonition of the Lord. The second of those is nouthesia, and it comes apart into 2 pieces the same way the others did. Nous meaning mind, antithemy meaning to place, to lay down, to set something somewhere on purpose. Nouthesia is a putting into the mind. It occurs 3 times in the New Testament, and this verse is one of the 3. Look at what the sentence does across its 2 halves. The thing it forbids is about what a father manufactures in a child. Anger, produced from close beside, accumulated across years, until it is simply part of the furniture. The thing it commands is about what a father lays down inside one, deliberately, the way somebody puts a thing on a shelf where it can be found again later. That is the entire instruction. It is 4 lines long, and it was read out loud to a house. And that matters, because 2 different people are listening to this. If you were the child in it, the ache you have carried is not a failure to honor. You may have spent 30 years believing that the discomfort you felt about your own parents was disobedience, wearing a religious word. It was not. There is a verse about what was done to you, and it is not tucked away in some obscure corner of the book. It sits in the same paragraph as the one that got quoted at you, 4 lines down. The text named it before you ever found the words for it. It named it in Greek, in the 1st century, in a letter read out loud in somebody's front room, and it has been sitting there the whole time. You were not being unfaithful. You were working from half a passage, because half is what you were handed. And if you were the parent in it, some of you were, and some of you have been awake at 2 in the morning about it. Verse 4 is not the sentence. It is the risk. Paul names a risk so it can be steered around. He is not reading out a finding. The second half of that same sentence tells you what to do instead, and what it tells you to do is feed them. That is available at any age. It was available yesterday. It is available at 74. One child gets loud. One child goes quiet. The Bible warns a parent about both. Now go back to the room. A man is standing in somebody's house with a letter in his hands, reading it out to everyone who could fit inside. He reaches the 6th chapter and says, "Children, obey your parents." And every adult turns and looks at the children. Then he keeps reading. 4 lines later, he says something to the fathers about anger. Nobody wrote down what that room did. We do not know if anybody shifted their feet, or looked at the floor, or reached over and put a hand on a small shoulder. That did not get recorded, and I am not going to invent it for you. But the letter was read out loud, and it was read to everybody, and the children did not leave. The child was in the room.